What? What's going on? There's nothing so spiky because this has been going on forever and ever.
I have the pleasure of introducing Ann Odell. Ann Odell is a 20-year veteran of the San Diego Police Department. She had the wisdom to retire from that position, but while she was in that position, she started one of the first and probably the best specialized domestic violence units in the country. Ann Odell set up that unit. She set up the training for that unit. They set up investigative forums that have basically been plagiarized and used throughout the country very effectively. I've personally had the privilege of hearing Ann Odell speak on quite a few occasions, and I can tell you that she's a very interesting speaker. She's got an awful lot of energy, a lot of experience to share with us, and she will be giving us a wealth of new ideas about how to approach domestic violence in a new way and have a new perspective. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ann Odell.
Before we get started, I want to find out who's in my audience. So if you are in law enforcement, please raise your hand. Oh, great. Okay, how many prosecutors do we have? 2, 3, good. Do we have any defense attorneys here? Too bad. We like to have defense attorneys here. We figure if we can get them on our side, educate them about this issue, they really become more of a help than a hindrance. How about judges? Do we have any judges here today? Are you judges or clerks or judges? What kind of a court do you preside over?
Justice court judge.
Okay, and in the back, sir? Same, okay. Do we have any probation or parole people? Victim services, people who work with DV victims. People who work with batterers. Any counseling for batterers? Educators. Medical personnel, mental health, medical health. Okay, did I miss anybody at all? Okay. A couple disclaimers right at the start. I'm going to be calling him the batterer and her the victim, not because it's that way 100% of the time. The statistics in San Diego are 92% of the time our offender is male. That means that 8% of the time our offender is female. I've personally arrested females and asked that charges be filed against them. But the number of females who constitute primary physical aggressors compared to men is very, very low. And if you've ever spoken, you know how difficult it is to play that politically correct game of he, she, they through 8 hours of speaking. I'm not going to do it. You all know that I know that females can be primary physical aggressors, but they just aren't as often. So I'm switching it and saying he's a batterer, she's a victim. The second thing is both the tapes and I use profanity on occasion. Try to do it in context for making a point, if you will. So I apologize in advance if I offend anybody. I try not to do it too much. Certainly the tapes are very reflective of real life. They are real life in many cases, and there will be profanity. So just so you know in the beginning. We're going to spend this morning talking about soft stuff. Soft stuff, not in the way that maybe you've ever heard it before, but soft stuff, dynamics, myths, etc., about domestic violence, but with a real police twist on it. So it'll be a little different. In the afternoon, we're going to get right down to nitty-gritty, nuts and bolts, about investigations, how you put together an airtight case to practice what we call in San Diego victimless prosecution, why that works, why that saves lives. As I talk to you today, I'm not only bringing you the experience that I've gained over 6.5 years working with 60,000 cases of domestic violence in San Diego, but the things that I've picked up in all the 46 states that I've gone to. It's not uncommon for me to go to a state and pick up something new that I've never heard of before. So it's coming from a rather large pool of experience. But to get us started, I want to play a very short clip for you. This is from Post in California.
Is he white, black, Hispanic, or yellow? He's white, he's law enforcement, he probably has... Wait a minute, what do you mean law enforcement? What is he? Patrol. He's got a restraining order against him. He was just inside my house, and he hit me when he was in. I heard that, yes. Did you hear him slap me? Yes, I did. Thank you. Okay. Kids are freaking out. Follow one of the girls. Help me! Help me! He's already in the grave! Please help me! He didn't break the door! Please! Okay, what happened? He didn't break the door!
think that years ago we called this a nuisance call. When I became a patrol officer about 21 years ago, it didn't take me long to figure out the party line when we went to these calls. And the party line was, these calls pissed us off. We really thought that we shouldn't be going to them because it wasn't real police work, right? I mean, real police work was making DUI arrests and interrupting drug deals and arresting burglars and doing all that real police work, but certainly not stepping into someone's home and dealing with the problem of violence in their home. And as a result of that attitude and a lack of real good training, we did a very poor job at it, especially me. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I went to a house and walked through the door, and if I didn't slip around in blood, guts, and gore going in, it was no big thing. I mean, I was famous for keeping both parties together, never separating them, never allowing a victim to feel any shred of trust in me, and never digging for evidence, never looking for injuries. If it wasn't right in front of me, I didn't care. I mean, I didn't look for it. I was famous for putting my hands on my hips and saying to people, if I have to come back here, somebody's going to go to jail. That's what I did 21 years ago. And I'd like to think in 1997 we've made a little progress since then, but I have to tell you, I was in Arkansas watching cops one night, and there it was, big as life, Boston PD, 2 cops responding to a DV call. They keep the people together, and guess what one of the cops says before they leave? If I have to come back on my shift, somebody's going to jail. Not bloody likely they'd call us back, no matter what happened. Real effective police intervention. Let's threaten them. Well, I also did a lot of victim blaming. Why? Because it was a lot easier than trying to figure out why one person would think they had an absolute right to use power and control and violence against their partner. So I picked out anything I could on the victim and figured that's why she was beaten. You know, she's a bitch. He says she provokes him. Look at what she looks like. She talks, you know, horribly. She looks cheap. He says she's running around. You know, she looks a mess. It must be her fault. She must be one of those flawed women. You know, maybe she asked for it. Was I the only one? Oh, no. I mean, the people that filled the jury boxes 20 years ago felt that way. In some parts of the country, they still do. We blamed the victim because it was just so easy to do it. And in fact, the favorite question back then, and up until a couple of years ago, in fact, in many parts of the country was, you know, I really feel sorry for these battered women, but one thing I just don't understand, why doesn't she just leave? When the question really should be, why does he beat her and how can we stop him as a society? We finally got educated in San Diego. We no longer ask that really stupid question, why doesn't she leave? Because what it says is, I know nothing about DV when I say this. I know nothing about this issue. Well, I'm glad to say that it's no longer that way in San Diego, nor many of the places that I've been to. What we see happening in this country are what we call national trends that are making a real difference in how many people live and how many people die because of domestic violence. The first of these trends is the realization that if you really want to address domestic violence properly, it cannot be laid in the lap of one agency, i.e. we can't do what we did for years, and that is throw it in the lap of victim advocates and say, you advocates, you take care of these poor battered women, put them in shelters, keep them safe, the problem will go away. It doesn't work. I mean, if it did, we'd no longer have people dying. We'd no longer be looking at generation after generation of victim and batterer. Nor can we today, now that we finally have police officers being more aggressive in their response to this issue, look to just the police department or the sheriff's department and say, you guys just arrest the batteries, and that alone will solve the problem, because it simply doesn't work that easily. The only thing that is showing a true change in the level of domestic violence, and especially the number of people who die because of it, is when all parts of the community come together and take upon their shoulders their own part of the responsibility. What do I mean by that? I mean by the creation of DV councils, domestic violence task force, just a simple police, probation, judges, prosecutors, and victim advocates working together without a formal setting. That kind of a process makes a difference. We started that kind of a process going back over 10 years ago. And one of the first things that we did that really changed for things in San Diego was we put together a DV task force. Now, in the early days, it was called a domestic violence task force. Today, We call it the San Diego Domestic Violence Council. It's a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, blah, 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 all that legal stuff. It still remains as effective as it's always been. And this is the way that it looks now. We have a board of directors on the top, but the most important part of our council has all these subcommittees. And the subcommittees are responsible for addressing issues that can be changed or addressed within particular law enforcement, prosecution, medical arena, et cetera, et cetera. So whenever a problem arises, we'll go to the law enforcement committee if it's law enforcement related and deal with it there. Probably some of the most important things that happened early in the days of the DV task force were a number of things. First of all, we wrote a law enforcement protocol. What was that? That was a promise by all 9 law enforcement agencies, signed by their head of the agency, that their cops would respond to DV in a standardized way. Why? So all the victims in our county, 2.5 million people, could expect the same thing when cops came to the scene. That it wouldn't necessarily be according to the agenda of the responding patrol officer, which can lead to problems. So that protocol was important. We produced a prosecution protocol. We produced a protocol for medical people, because in the state of California, mandatory medical reporting is part of the law. They are our partners in the fight against domestic violence. I know that's not the situation in Montana, but I think you sometimes have some people reporting anyway. One of the important things we did in the early days was put together a bench guide for judges, because we discovered many judges, especially those who didn't have a law enforcement background, were easily, how shall I say, seduced within the sanctified area of the courtroom. They were not adept necessarily at picking up how dangerous batterers would be, especially if they hadn't spent maybe 20 years in law enforcement, which is not the only prerequisite for being a judge, but I think it really is helpful. So this bench guide for our judges really helped. But I have to tell you, in the early days of working together, it was a nasty scene. It really was. And we all came together and said, this is our problem, we got to solve it. But let me just paint a scenario for you. Here we are, one side of the table are all the cops, right? On the other side of the table, we've got victim advocates. And the cops are pointing to the victim advocates and saying, you know, you flower children, you have no idea what we're up against in the field. It's tough out there. It's not black and white. It's gray. It's difficult. You don't know what cops go through. And the victim advocates over here pointed their fingers back at us and said, you guys have never learned about this issue. You deal from your gut, which is not a good place to go to make decisions. I mean, do they really just give you a gun and say, go shoot by yourself, no training? And we were both right. We didn't understand each other. We both wanted basically the same thing, safety of the victim and stop the violence, but kind of within different agendas. We cops, used to point our fingers at the prosecutors and say, well, we make arrests. You know, we write these reports. We put these guys in jail. We can't help it if you prosecutors never bring charges. It's your fault. So much easier to point a finger at somebody else and say it's your fault. And the prosecutors would point their fingers back at us and say, we need more than a 3-paragraph piece of crap report. We need something to take to court called evidence. You know, you're giving us a report with 3 paragraphs on it. Doesn't help. Doesn't cut it. And then we all pointed our collective fingers at the judges and said, you guys are in ivory towers and those black robes. You don't have a clue of what's going on. You don't know about lethality. You don't know how dangerous it is. You're letting these people out, you know, at the turn of a hat, whatever. You know, no bail, just let them out. Own recognizance. So it wasn't until we got over this finger-pointing stuff, and we did, 6 weeks of it, we finally said, you know, this isn't getting us anywhere. Feels good to blame somebody else, but, you know, it's not effective. It's not making a change. And that's when we began to really start to cross-train, talk to one another, put aside our egos and our turf and our territorial issues, and get on with the business of making San Diego a safer place. And it really did work. But it wasn't easy in the beginning. So if anybody is just starting the process, you know, just keep the hope alive and keep working, because ultimately you can get to a point where you start to work together, hopefully. So that was the first national trend that I wanted to discuss. The second one that really had its roots in San Diego but has now spread to a lot of places in the country is designing early intervention strategies. And what I mean by this is simply, if you're a cop, let me ask the cops in the room, what kind of an arrest would you rather make, felony or misdemeanor? Felony, right? You make a felony arrest, that's going to get you your COC, because that's what you call a commanding officer citation. It's going to get you the pat on the back from the supervisor. It's going to put you in a better position to promote up or into detectives, you know, away from patrol, away from doing the grunt work, right? And so it's better all around. And there's kind of a thrill along with making a felony arrest. If you're a prosecutor, let me ask the prosecutors, what would you rather prosecute, a misdemeanor or a felony? Felony, thank you. I couldn't hear you back there. Why? Because, you know, who wants to prosecute a Mickey Mouse misdemeanor? Rather take that felony to court, right? The problem is, into what category do most DV crimes fall? Misdemeanor or felony? Misdemeanor. In order to get a felony in most states in this country, you have to attempt homicide or kill your victim or really beat them up so severely, we're talking about serious, serious assault. So let's just pretend that there's a homicide, and now that prosecutor's got that felony, and that cop made that felony arrest on that homicide suspect, right? Well, the problem with this theory is, if we all say, we prosecutors and we law enforcement, and by the way, we judges, that our job is part of the public safety system, and we're looking at the dead body of a DV victim, it's not too safe for that victim, is it? We've waited just a tad too late to intervene. And that's what brought us in San Diego to consider how we might intervene much, much earlier. So we could kind of keep our promise that, indeed, we work for the public safety system. So what do? We started putting a lot of resources and training and work into training police officers how to intervene at the lowest level possible. And not saying we had to wait until we had that serious, serious felony to intervene at that point. The third thing that we did that helped us do it was developing a focus on the abuser. Traditionally, who have we focused on in DV calls? The what? No, not in DV. If I went to a call, what did I say years ago to the victim? You want to press charges? You want to prosecute? What do you want me to do about this? Did we not say those things? Yeah, so who do we focus on? The victim. Most of the time it was according to what the victim wanted. It was for me, 21 years ago, if I went to a call and I said to a woman, you want to press charges? You want to prosecute? You got to sign here. And she said no. Bam, I'm out of there. 10-8, K-King, no paper. I like it. You know, I was a typical cop. I didn't like to write paper. So if she gave me an out, I was out of there. The only problem was there's no intervention. And prosecutors are not exempt from this either. Let's say that an officer writes a really good report, and he brings it into the prosecutor the next morning. And the prosecutor says, okay, this looks like a good report. Make sure that victim is in my office tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And the victim doesn't show up. Prosecutors ever say, well, damn, if she doesn't care, neither do I. Don't. I mean, we cops know how to dump cases. Prosecutors know how to dump cases. Because of the victim's unwillingness to play along, we've dumped cases on DV for years. We really have. You know, any possibility, we dump it. Well, that wasn't good enough for us in San Diego. We always knew the victims would go sideways, that they would recant, that they would lie on the stand, that they would testify for the defense. And we said, you know, if we continue to accept this and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it, then we'll never make any progress, right? Because there won't be any intervention. So we started to figure out a way around that phenomenon. And we did find one, which I'll be sharing with you later in the day. But it required that we changed our focus from the victim to the abuser. Funny thing is, when I went through the academy years ago, and I went through investigative procedures for robberies and burglaries and all the other crimes I was supposed to investigate, nobody ever taught me that one of the first questions I should ask that victim of a robbery is, say, do you want to press charges against this robber? I mean, they never told me to do that, but they did in DV. Ask the victim what she wants to do. So we began to develop a focus on the abuser. And the way it is now, it doesn't matter in San Diego if the victim stays with the abuser pending trial or doesn't stay. We don't say to ourselves, well, it can't be that serious, she's staying with the abuser. And the reason we don't do that is because of this. The little phenomenon goes on pending trial. Batters accused of crimes pending trial are very oftentimes the nicest men on the face of the earth. Oh, baby, oh, baby. I mean, this is the best time she's had in a long time because he's worried about what she's going to say on the stand. We also know that 75% of the women who die in the United States of America because of domestic violence die trying to leave or having already left their batterer. So for anybody in this day and age, especially a peace officer, to say to a victim, well, just leave and you'll be safe, is a stupid, I repeat, stupid, stupid statement. because it's not true. When victims leave, they are at higher risk for dying, higher risk for dying. So the answer to her problem is not to say, just leave. This isn't to say we never tell victims how they can get out safely. We do. But it's got to be at a time when she knows that it's a lesser chance that she's going to die. Nobody asks a victim to leave in San Diego. They don't say, just go and you're going to be safe, because we know it's not true. We know that's when they're going to die. So we focus on the abuser. We don't focus on what the victim wants. Today in San Diego, and for the past 5 to 6 years, you will never hear a peace officer ever say to a victim, what do you want to do? It is no longer part of our verbiage. Completely out. We never ask victims if they want to prosecute. That's a decision made by the prosecutor. We never ask victims if they want them arrested. That's a decision we pay cops to make. We train cops to make that decision. We don't expect the victim to do it. They're the victim. They have enough problems on their life. We ask cops to investigate and use their probable cause determination to make an arrest. And we don't leave it up to the victim as to what happens with the case afterwards. Again, that's a decision made by the prosecutor. So that's what I meant by developing a focus on the abuser. The last two very quickly, eliminating victim blaming policies. The best example I can give you is 21 years ago. Not unusual for me to say to a victim, what'd you do that pissed him off so bad? You know, and I had no idea with that statement I was now colluding with the batterer who's been telling her for the last 10 years she is the reason for his violence. We've now trained officers how to ask the right kinds of questions in the right way. Sequential questions. What happened first? What happened next? What happened then? Not ever to say, what did you do that made him so mad? Which is a victim blaming question. The last one, long-term accountability for the abuser. Arrest is wonderful. It is important. It should never be given up when you've got PC to make an arrest. I don't know if you've got mandatory arrest in the state. I can tell you California doesn't have it, but we are very aggressive and proactive about making arrests. And what we talk about when we talk about arrest is that's just the first part of the process. That beyond arrest, if all you do is arrest this person for a couple of days, he's incarcerated and now he gets out, and he never goes to counseling, there's a very little chance that you'll ever see real intervention. And the chances are very high that this person will reoffend. And you're going to go back to the same house over and over and over and over again, which is what frustrates police officers. So this is what we did in San Diego. Our system is very, very slick. It's set up to go into motion the first time that a person is convicted of a particular offense. It's never going to be the first offense. Typically, it's a second or third offense. Now they've gotten to the point that they've left us with enough evidence we can ask for charges. And so this is what happens. We offer our first-time convicted people a golden opportunity. And the golden opportunity is this. The first thing is they got to plead guilty. Why? So we have a hammer over their head. Our program's called Hammer and Hope. We want a hammer over their head. Why? So when he reoffends, or if he does reoffend, or he doesn't keep his part of the bargain, then we can put him in jail. Okay? We don't have to resurrect a dead case 12 months from now. That's the first part. He has to plead guilty. Number two, he has to agree to 3 years of probation. 3 years of probation because it's awfully difficult for offenders to stay good for 3 years in a row. Number three, he has to agree to attend one of 20 counseling programs for batteries in San Diego. All 20 programs are based loosely on Duluth, Minnesota's behavior-based therapy. Okay? It's not anger management, because anger doesn't cause DV. It's not a short-term program. It's a 52-week program. 52 weeks, 2 hours a session. Why did we pick a year? We went across the whole country looking for the most effective programs, and it was a year-long program. And under this program, our batterers who stay in therapy for a year, the recidivism rate is less than 15%. Now you have a phenomenon going on where the cops don't necessarily have to go back to the same house for the next 15 years, because these people are not reoffending, and that's what's happened. The last part of this is the offender has to pay for their own therapy. Why do we do that? It's part of taking responsibility for your actions, part of making you own them. We do have indigent spots. We certainly have poor people in San Diego, but in San Diego, a batterer has to go into a court of law and prove to the court that he's indigent. And if he just stubbed out a cigarette and he looks hungover, he is not indigent. If they have money for cigarettes and alcohol, they can afford to pay for their own therapy. And the costs range from $5 a visit all the way up to $30 a visit. So there's a wide range of programs that they can go to, but they have to go. By the way, the thing that we've progressed to in San Diego too now is we've got special DV courts, which are wonderful. Our domestic violence courts, we have 2 out of our numerous courts in San Diego that have specialist type judges in charge of them. And the thing that makes these judges so unique and makes them so effective in this is, first of all, they get it. They understand this issue. And they require people on probation not to come in every 3 months, not to come in every 6 months when they have all kinds of chance to reoffend and screw up. They have them come in every 30 days. Every 30 days they have to report to the court. And they have to bring a paper from their counseling group. And the counseling groups, by the way, report back to the court whether Joe Smith showed up, whether he's attending, whether he's really engaged in conversation, or if he's just sitting there like a bump on a log. And if they aren't playing along and doing what they're supposed to do, then they can get incarcerated for the length of their sentence. So that's how it works, and it's fairly effective. By the way, if they don't show up, we issue a bench warrant automatically. It's built into the instructions by the judge. We issue automatically a bench warrant for their arrest, and then we start looking for them and pick them up on the warrant. So that's how it works. And it's very effective. As I told you, the recidivism is much lower. The goals, when we started with our task force and continue with our council, our goals, our common goals are very simple, nothing complex about them. These goals are everywhere. They're in the DV unit of the San Diego Police Department. They're at all the area stations. They're up at the academy. They're in the city attorney's DV unit, the district attorney's DV unit, the probation's specialized DV unit. It's in DV court. Everybody knows that if they do anything about DV, they respond to it, work with the victim or perpetrator at all. Their goals are very simply make the victim safer, stop the violence, hold the batterer accountable, and the one that evolved over time, never let a victim die in vain. This kind of happened because when we got to the point that we were really preventing homicide, when people died, we got real personal about it. And we didn't just get personal and gnash our teeth and grieve. What we did is we picked apart everything we did right and everything we did wrong. We allowed ourselves to go back in time to the first point of contact between the victim and the system, and we looked at everything that happened, and we said, okay, this was right, this was wrong, this needs to be improved. And that helped us. In fact, it gave us opportunities to improve the system, and one of the opportunities I'll be sharing with you a little later today. But it's better than just saying, oh my God, you can't save everybody. Once you start saying that in criminal justice, believe me, your motivation to change a system is nil. When I look at people who die in the system, my first question is, what can we do better next time around? And the way we personalize it is it's not just, a case number. It's a name. It's a face. It's somebody we know. I mean, it's somebody we got involved with. And we always do this kind of thing, and you may think it's kind of Pollyannish. Instead of just thinking of it as a stranger, we say, what if it were my daughter? Would I care about the system then? Would I work to change the system if it was somebody I know, someone who was dear to me? And that really does change the whole dynamic for people. So those were our goals. Now you might be wondering, well, was it effective? I'm going to show you how effective it was in San Diego and then share with you some other jurisdictions that have used this kind of an approach with success. We talk about domestic violence homicide prevention. And I have to tell you, this flies into the face of the homicide investigator that taught me 21 years ago in the academy. When they taught me that homicide was really a crime of passion, the only thing you can do is figure out who done it later. That certainly there's nothing you can do to prevent it. But they were wrong, because really back about 15 years ago, there was a theory around, and the first article I ever read was by a cop out of New York City by the name of Ed Stubing. And he wrote about the fact that you could prevent domestic violence homicide if you change the response to the criminal justice system. And I hadn't seen it ever happen in San Diego, but I thought, well, it's worth a try. So when we started making the change at my police department, we told the cops, listen, we're going to save lives with this approach. And I got to tell you, back in 1990, they thought we were full of shit. They thought this isn't going to work. So there we are. We told them we're going to prevent homicide. So back in 1990, the year that I became the DV coordinator, you'll see our city is very large, 1.3 million people, 6th largest city in the United States, 2,000 plus sworn police officers. That's a big department. Back in that year, 18 of our homicides that year in the city of San Diego were because of DV. That was roughly 30% of our homicide rate. When we go around the country and we look at the percentage of homicides associated with domestic violence, we find a range from anywhere around 25% up to 100% of all homicides will be DV. And I'd like to give you just a couple of ideas or a couple of examples. In Providence, Rhode Island, 2 years ago, 100% of their homicides were DV. Big problem in Providence. Now they've put in new training, a DV unit, and that is changing. In the state of North Dakota, not very far from here, rural state, 600,000 people, I had a sheriff come up to me at one of these seminars one time and say to me, well, little lady, we don't have a lot of domestic violence in my area of the country. And I felt horrible telling him that, in fact, the rate of domestic violence homicide in the state of North Dakota 2 years ago was 80%. It's true, only 5 people died in North Dakota, but 4 were wives killed by husbands. That's a very high percentage. And one has to wonder why the victims in his area of the country don't feel safe enough to pick up the phone and call for help. That's an important question to look at. So, again, as we go around the country, 25 to 100% of all homicides will be DV. By the way, it's not a new phenomenon. In Germany, in 1931, 62% of all the homicides were wives killed by husbands. So this isn't new or anything. So there we are, 1990, 18 homicides, a little under 7,400 police reports. Was that all the DV going on in San Diego? Not a chance. The most conservative estimates of how much DV is going on in any community in the country is 16% of the population at any one time is engaged in domestic violence. So if you ever want to figure out how many reports you would see in your agency, if it was always reported, and it never is, you just take your population, times it by 16%, and that would tell you, right? Now, what we really know that we see is probably about 25% of the DV that's happening. Quite frankly, if all of it were reported, the system would crumble. We just couldn't handle it. No way. So 7,400 was not reflective. And I'll tell you what happened in San Diego. In 1990, my chief, Bob Bergreen, called me into his office and said, Odell, that's what he called me, Odell, we have a new job for you. And I said, what job is that, chief? And he says, we're going to make you the first domestic violence coordinator for the city of San Diego. And I said, well, what does a DV coordinator do? He said, call New York City, they have one. They were the only other agency that had one in the country. And then he went on and he said, this is what I want you to do here, though. I want you to do research in our department. Now understand, in 1990, by then, California had had 4 years of mandated laws on the books. Mandated laws that directed officers that whenever they went to domestic violence, they were required to write a written report. And there were 2 other mandates. They were required to both verify and enforce restraining orders, you call them protective orders. The third thing is they were required to give to victims written information about resources and help and legal rights within the community. And Bob Bergreen, having spent 33 years in law enforcement by 1990, figured maybe some of our cops weren't getting the message. That maybe it was business as usual for many of them on the street. So I did the research that he asked of me. It's explained in one of the first articles in your material, and it proved that he was right. It proved that for many of our cops, it was business as usual. They didn't buy the new law, they didn't like the new law, they were pissed about losing their discretion. And the most amazing things I discovered as a white woman was that our level of service to communities of color was even worse than it was in white communities. And I have to tell you, as a 15-year veteran of the police department, I was ashamed. I thought, you know, how can we do this? This isn't right, you know? We're supposed to be wearing the white hats. We're the good guys. So it was quite a shock. Then Bob Bergreen said to me, okay, I want it to change. I want you to go out and I want you to retrain all the pertinent levels on our department. Police officers, their first-line supervisors, their second-line supervisors, field training officers, the new recruits. I want them all to know what my message from the chief's office is. And the message was this: we never promised you a rose garden. You don't like the law? Get a new job. This is the law. You wear a San Diego police uniform. I pay you a check every 2 weeks. I expect my policy and state law to be followed in San Diego. Harsh approach? Yeah, it was a harsh approach, but it worked. The following year, we had 60% more police reports on DV because we'd done 2 things. We'd better educate our cops. Good training is everything. If they don't have training, they have a perfect excuse not to do the job right. And secondly, we gave our cops some clear expectations. We said, we expect this. And the third thing is that big A word, accountability. We're going to be looking over your shoulder. You know, you don't do the reports, we're going to find out. We were lucky. We had a CAD system. CAD system gave a complete, printout. Which cops went to which call, what the reporting party said, how'd they clear, with a report or with a 10-8K King, no action taken. So we could tell. And that was his message, which I had the luxury of delivering to everybody, which didn't necessarily make me the most popular person on San Diego PD. But look what's happening in the homicides. They go up by 4. Now, also understand the other 2 things we were promising cops. If we change our response, we'd save lives. We wouldn't have to promise to go to the same house for the next 15 years. And this wasn't happening by 1991, right? Homicides go up. So I'm sweating it now. I'm going, oh my God, now we got them writing reports, but the homicides go up. Oh my God, I'm really worried. It's not going to work in San Diego. But it did the next year. The homicides plummeted to 8. So what do the cops say in San Diego? It's a fluke, Odell, don't get excited. We're so cynical, you know. Even when we have success, right in front of us we go, it's a fluke, it will never last. Well, it did last. Our homicides most years have remained in the single digits. When you look at 7, 9, 10, 8 homicides in a city of 1.3 million people because of domestic violence, you are looking at the lowest rate of domestic violence homicide in any middle and major sized city in this country. There's nobody that's lower. There is one jurisdiction that's better, and I'm going to get to them in a minute. But this is very, very low. This is about 7% of our total homicide rate. So the first thing you ought to do is figure out how many people are dying in your community because of DV. And when I ask chiefs sometimes, I'm really amazed that they don't know, because my feeling is this: if you don't know how bad a problem is, how can you possibly attack it? I mean, this is not hard to figure out. You know, when people die, you just go, okay, this was DV when you finally figure out who did it, or it was a drug ripoff, or it was a drive-by shooting, or whatever. But you categorize them, and then you know where to put some of your resources. You know, you put more resources into gang activity if most of your people are dying because of gang activity. It's good policing. Makes sense. So this is good, but I got to tell you, there are better places than San Diego. The first of which is Quincy, Massachusetts. I don't know if you've ever heard of this jurisdiction, but they lay right next to Boston. There are 90,000 people in Quincy, Massachusetts, so it's not a small place. 90,000 people. They started changing their whole process, criminal justice process, 15 years ago. This is a place where you violate a restraining order, you get custody. Nobody just taps you on the wrist and says, well, you probably just made a mistake. You get custody. You break a restraining order. I mean, it's really, really tough there. But you know how many people have died in Quincy, Massachusetts in the last decade because of DV? 90,000 people population. How many people do you think have died because of DV? Any guesses? 0. Nobody has died in Quincy in 10 years because of DV. That's amazing. If you're in the job of protection, public safety, you got to ask yourself, what is Quincy doing that's so much different from what we do? Because, you know, if you want to be safe and you're a DV victim, you go live in Quincy. Because you don't die there. You just don't die there. They do an outstanding job. I mean, an outstanding job, and we all have something to learn from them. These other places, too, by the way, Tulsa and Nashville, 18 months after they retrained everybody and put in some specialized detectives, their homicide rates went down approximately 73% in both cities, DV homicide rates. So the phenomenon, whenever it's replicated any place, works. It's really effective. Don't let anybody ever tell you you can't prevent homicide, which if you're a cop and you pinned on a badge and you promise to protect and serve, whatever years ago, is the epitome of police work. When you keep people alive, that's real police work. I mean, they're alive because of your work. Now, just to give you some more information on Quincy, they have free books, and it's free to call them. 1-800 numbers. All you got to do is call these 800 numbers, 800-662-8337, extension 62, and they will send you free copies that are all about Quincy. One of them is on the Quincy Probation Department. And this particular book talks about how the probation department works closely with local law enforcement. So if you're law enforcement and probation people aren't here, please get a book so that you can give it to your probation people. They do some great things in Quincy. When they have an outstanding warrant on a DV, they publish the guy's picture in the local paper with a complete written description of what he did that got him the warrant in the first place. They don't say he's wanted for a particular section. They say John Jones is wanted for spitting on his ex-wife and kicking her and choking her about the neck. That's what they say. And lo and behold, people call up and turn in John Jones. I mean, they really do. We do something a little different in San Diego. We have a conservative publisher who won't let us put pictures of offenders in the paper. But every year, we have a sweetheart sweep on Valentine's Day. We think there's a little bit of irony in that. And we publish it well in advance, and we tell them, hey, we're going to go looking for all of our guys wanted for DV warrants on Valentine's Day. We're coming your way. So what happens is all these guys start turning themselves into the marshal's office because they don't want us to wake them up at 5 a.m. It's great. This is really great. So it works. But anyway, Quincy is just far and away the best probation parole department in the country, and there are a lot of departments in the country. The second book that you can get for free on Quincy is about their community response manual. So all you got to do is call that 800 number, and they will send you one or more. They'll send you up to 5 copies of each book free. Now, the second book, called Instant Evidence, is put out by Polaroid, and it's a special issue on domestic violence with 6 different articles in it that talk about how different agencies respond innovatively to domestic violence. And that number is 800-811-5764, extension 215. So it's a free number, free information, and I would think that everybody in the room would want some, unless you live in a jurisdiction where nobody dies because of DV, and in that case, your work is done. You don't have to worry about it. But if anybody's still dying because of this issue, we've got something to learn, and we're not done with our work. So that's the free information. Okay. Okay, how do we change stuff in San Diego? Well, I got to tell you, it was a tough sell. It was not easy. Not easy at all. Why? Because we had so many police officers. Why? Because we had spent the last 20 or so years doing business one way, in fact, more than 20 years. You know, for years and years. Our mode when we went to a DV call was to put on our counselor hat and go there and try to get them to kiss and make up, patch things up, and hope to hell they didn't call us again on our shift, right? Right. That's what we did. So we had to change that mindset, if you will, to one of our job is not to be a counselor to the lovelorn. Our job is we go out and do criminal investigations, and when we discover probable cause, they pay me as a cop to enforce the law. That's my job. And that was a difficult mindset because it required more work and more effort from cops. So the first thing we did to try to get their attention is we drew an analogy between DUIs and DVs. Who works in patrol in the front row here, on the second row? I know you guys aren't cops, right? Okay. Who works patrol here? Anybody? You do. What's your name, sir?
Bob.
Bob, you work where?
Wang.
Plains? How far is that from Missoula?
About an hour and a half.
Bob, how long have you been a cop?
Almost.
Almost a year. Ooh, a newbie. Got any salt on your shoulders yet? No, probably not yet, right? Okay. You make DUI arrest, right? Okay. From the time that you notice that somebody appears to be under the influence, is swerving all over the road, etc., and then you pull that person over, you do your field sobriety test, maybe you take them to a specific place to get an intoxilizer done or whatever you do here. And then you write all the paper, and you book them into jail, and now you're completely done. 10-8, you can go on to your next call. How much time have you spent?
3 and 4 hours.
You are new. 3 to 4 hours. Oh my God. When you get better, you'll do it in 2 hours or maybe 2.5. Now, is this a misdemeanor first time around in the state of Montana? So it's a misdemeanor. 3 hours to spend on a misdemeanor? That's a lot. Why would you spend so much time on a misdemeanor investigation of DUI? I think it's a...
Eventually, it could build up to something more, start ball rolling on this guy for future arrests, people arrested.
Could you possibly end up in court on the basis of your investigation? Could you? Sure, right. And what is it you want done with the report that you did in the investigation? What do you want it to yield in a courtroom? A conviction, right? You certainly don't want to look stupid when you go to court, right? Having part of the facts there, not all of the facts, right? So you want to have your work pay off. You want it to produce something. You ever worried about liability? Like, what if you just pretended he wasn't swerving all over the road in front of you and just kind of let him go because you're tired and you want to get back home or whatever? I mean, you ever worried about liability? Your chief is. Well, you're only got a year on. Your chief is very worried about liability. Think about it. And don't you think that Matt has done their job well? Aren't you aware of the fact that drunk drivers kill? Yeah, Matt has done their job magnificently. Drunk drivers kill. So then we would ask cops, and Bob, I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you how much time you spend at a DV. I will tell you that I asked my cops in San Diego that question, and if they were tenured, they'd say in a kind of smart-ass way, yeah, 20 minutes, man, in and out. As quickly as I can get out of there, I'm out of there. And the younger ones, the newer ones, would probably say, well, I spend 30 or 40 minutes. So the question became, okay, let me get this straight. These are both misdemeanors. I spend 2 to 3 hours on the DUI, and I spend 30 to 40 minutes on the DV. How in the hell can I expect to get a quality product out of 30 to 40 minutes as opposed to 3 hours? And the answer is, of course, we don't. We don't. And that's why we continue to go back and back and back and back. So we said to them, you know, DV is pretty serious too. I mean, it does lead to homicide. DV kills people. And because we have not intervened, domestic violence and child abuse remain fairly unchecked in our world, and that leads to a lot of other crime we deal with as cops on an everyday basis. We'll talk about it more when we get to the big picture. But the point is we can't get a quality product with a slipshod approach. And we've always dealt with it with a slipshod approach up until this time. So we said to our guys, listen, we've been doing it this way for decades, haven't we? Where have we gotten? Same bitches forever and ever. We go back to the same houses week after week. She's back with him. He's still doing it. No change. Now, if it hasn't worked for decades, what makes us think it's going to work in the next decade? Well, it isn't going to work in the next decade. So let's try something new. Let's put on our law enforcement hat and go and do a criminal investigation, assess for probable cause, and make an arrest if we find it. And do a good report so we don't look stupid in court. So we have all the facts there. So we tried it. The second thing we did is we made sure our cops had all the tools. Now I'm going to put this up here and you're going to say, why in the hell is she putting this up here? I can't understand this. But I'm going to kind of interpret it for you. I just want you to see that in San Diego, we felt it necessary to list every single penal code violation that had anything to do with domestic violence. Why would we do that? So our cops wouldn't make the mistake of thinking that we had 2, 3, or 4 little sections you could apply in domestic violence. And in fact, we have 28 on this page, and there are 4 others I never even listed. I want to go down through the list and tell you what these all mean. You probably have similar statutes here. And I might reach a couple that you don't have here, and this may prompt you to think about getting legislation changed or new law implemented. You got to know, most of these never started out being pinpointed for DV. But because our protocol said to cops, whenever possible, take the batterer to jail, our cops are very creative. They got very adept at taking particular sections and turning them into something you could use at domestic violence. 273.5 is spousal abuse. Visible injury, signs of internal injury, they go to jail. 273.6, violation of what you would call protective order. 240, that's attempted assault. Someone's trying to hit, they don't connect. 242 is a simple battery, a push, shove, whatever, no injury at all, just a simple thing. Unlawful touching, you might say. 243 is another kind of battery. It's a battery that requires a higher degree of injury, and it occurs between people who date but don't live together, just particular to California. 245, assault with a deadly weapon or force likely to produce great bodily injury. He kicks her all over the body, and he's got steel-tipped work boots on. That's assault likely to produce great bodily injury. It's a felony section. 417, threatening with a weapon. Illegal entry into the home of another. Terrorist threats to kill. Vandalism. Vandalism never used to be used for domestic violence until the case of Kahanik versus California. Kahanik was a female defendant who was separated from her husband. They both had Mercedes, a lot of money involved in this community property. She saw him one night driving around in his Mercedes with a new woman in the front seat, so she threw a brick through the window. He had her arrested for vandalism of their community property. She was convicted. She filed an appeal with the appellate court. They upheld the conviction. And from that point on, cops in San Diego and in California have used community property vandalism. I mean, it became, because of case law, extended to community property. So we no longer say to batterers who put their foot to the TV, put their fist through the wall, well, it's okay, it's your property. We say, you're going to jail, because we know this is how you intimidate the victim. And it's against the law in our state, so you go to jail. These next two are really interesting. Neither one of them had anything to do with DV. They both have something to do with the telephone. The first one, 136.1c, is dissuading a witness from reporting a crime. So let me ask you, how often do you ever hear a victim say, well, I was trying to call the police because he was hitting me, and he unplugged the phone? You ever hear this? Cops, you ever hear this? Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, all the time. Victim services people, all the time. He hung up the phone, or he took the phone away from me. In California, if he does it through force or fear, and what do you have in DV? Force and fear. We add the little C in that makes this felony misdemeanor wobbler a felony. So when the cop goes to the call and he finds out that he unplugged the phone or took the phone away from her, turn around, Jack, you're going to jail. No excuses. We got you. 136.1c. Even if he didn't hit her and put an injury on her, he goes to jail for a felony. 591, he cuts the phone line or damages or destroys the phone, even if he buys it at Radio Shack and it's his very own phone. The section says injuring the phone lines, interfering with the phone lines. So when they do that, and do they ever do this? Of course they do this. We take photos of the phone sometime. It's a felony section, 591 of the Penal Code, so he goes to jail for a felony. 597 is cruelty to animals. It's a felony in the state of California because of its placement on the lethality list. It's one of the 10 issues we look at when we're trying to triage cases and assess for potential lethality. Those things that will turn into or lead to homicide or suicide. So cruelty to animals is not minimized. It's a felony and you go to jail the minute you try to maim or kill a pet that belongs to the victim. The next one, 148, we know a lot of the batters are real cool in front of the police because they have a vested interest in being real cool in front of us. But we do know there's that little idiot population of batterers who not only want to beat her up but fight us too. You know, obstruction of justice. So they go to jail for fighting us with 148. This is drunk in public, threatening, harassing phone calls, stalking, robbery, attempted sexual assault, spousal rape, kidnapping, false imprisonment, trespassing, mayhem, attempted homicide, and homicide. These here all have to do with firearms. The last one, 12028.5, gives all California cops the legal authority to seize firearms at the scene of a DV call. Why? Because we know the difference between a battered woman and a dead woman in this country is a firearm more often than not. So we seize firearms under two statutes. Well, they're both under 12028.5, but under different conditions. If it's just that the victim says to us, I'm really scared because he has a lot of guns in the house, now we remove the guns for safekeeping. He can't get them for 48 hours. If, however, he's ever threatened to kill her, we now remove the firearms for evidence, and he will never get them back. And it's very good. It's led to, again, keeping people alive. So those are the tools we use, and what I'd recommend is that any agency make sure that all your tools, all your applicable statutes for DV, describing behaviors that go on all the time in DV, are on one piece of paper. That prompts your officers to think of all the different charges they can lay on the suspect. And that's good because it bumps up the bail. You know, I know many places here don't have bail when you initially put them in, but it may keep them in the more information you have in there about what really happened at the scene. The third one was the big picture. Why do we talk about the big picture? Well, because 21 years ago, I really believed, when I went to these calls, that we was just a couple who beat each other up. I'd heard it for years. Mutual combat. These people are lunatics. They beat each other up all the time. I had it over and over and over again. So when I went to these calls, I really thought the Joneses just duke it out every Saturday night. This is their MO, and their violence affects nobody else. The more I learned about this so I could prepare myself to train police officers in my agency, I discovered that was stupid because it simply wasn't true, that there was something called the big picture. And if we say in law enforcement that we really care about all the crime that we investigate and would like to get a handle on slowing it down, we need to care about DV and child abuse because mainly it's where it comes from. The big picture is just a list of facts, the first of which is the fact that 85% of our batterers learn this in the home. It's not a pathological sickness. No, that batterer is not sick. It's not a physiological defect, and it isn't a genetic flaw that he carries on from his dad. Domestic violence is one thing. It is learned behavior that most typically in our country, little boys will observe in an older male role model, dad, stepdad, mom's boyfriend, older brother, uncle, whatever. Use power and control, intimidation and violence to get their way, i.e. a payoff, without a sanction. And when you grow up seeing this phenomenon in front of you, then the little kid figures, okay, this is how I solve my problem. Especially if nobody gives them any other way to solve his problems, which happens a lot. So if you want to make a batter in today's world, this is what you do. You make sure that his dad beats up his mom and there's never any intervention. And number two, you make sure that the little boy was either physically abused or sexually abused as a child, and you get a batterer. Simple as that. So what are we talking about? We're talking about no intervention in DV and child abuse, and you'll get a batterer. The second one is the fact of the close correlation between DV and child abuse. We know 50% of the time when we're walking through the door in a DV call, we're also in a home where child abuse is currently going on. So if you all are like us, mandated reporters on child abuse, and you've been trained to recognize the signs, you should be reporting this within your reports to the proper authorities. The third one is from the Hazelden Foundation that shows that 63% of the boys in this country ages 11 to 20 arrested for homicide have killed their mother and assault her. That's not the job of 15 and 16-year-old boys. That's the job of the system to protect people, not to let teenage boys have to step up to the task. The next one is 30 to 50% of all willful homicides of females occur in the context of DV. Very unlike the way men die. Men die at the hands of strangers or mere acquaintances. Women die at the hands of those who profess to love them. So if any of you are the mothers or fathers of teenage girls, as a mother of 4 girls, I have to tell you that the best advice I could give you is to care a great deal about who she dates, who she gets engaged to, who she socializes with, and who she ultimately marries. Because women in this country are in far more danger in intimate relationships than they are on the streets of Plains or Missoula, Montana. They are at far more danger of being hurt by an intimate rather than a stranger in this country. 1/3 of all the female patients going to ER rooms are there because they've been battered. The AMA, of course, is finally asking the question, who did this? And now many jurisdictions are becoming part of the solution instead of remaining part of the problem. This next study has been done twice that I know of. First and foremost by Murray Strauss out of the University of Durham in New Hampshire. He's a professor who's long worked on this issue. And it showed that children from these homes are 1,000 times more likely to beat their own partners as adults. Last year, the American Psychological Association did the exact same study, produced a book with exactly the same results on it. And you know, it's funny, I didn't really have to get this information from studies because I'll tell you what happened to me. 1990, I become the DV coordinator. 1992, I'm in charge as one of 3 sergeants in my own unit, right? And we ran our unit 7 days a week. So I always opted to work Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. I'd have to get in there for 6 p.m. I always got there about 5:30. And my job was to make sure I took the 70 or so cases that came in Friday night, sat at the computer, did a computer background check on all the suspects before I gave them to my 6 detectives who were coming in to work that Saturday.
I worked Southeast San Diego for 7.5 years as a patrol officer. I mean, I can tell you nearly all the people I interacted with. So there I am in 1992. This is like 15 years after I've done doing patrol. And I'm looking at the name of this kid who's no longer a kid, he's like 22 years old, beating up his wife or his girlfriend. And I'm thinking, holy shit, I remember going to this house. His dad beat his mother. And I walked in, I tried to give him a kiss, and he got damn. I mean, nobody had to tell me about this intergenerational thing. I saw it was right in front of me. Talking about feeling like a failure. Well, geez, maybe I could have done something about it. Too little, too late. The next one is 80% of runaways in urban areas running away from domestic violence. Perhaps you don't have as many runaways here, but when they run, there's a reason. Now we start to see the link between DV, child abuse, and juvenile delinquency, and later criminal offenses as adults. Children from domestic violence homes are 74% more likely to commit crimes against the person. We're not talking about burglaries We're not talking about petty thefts. We're talking crimes against the persons, assaults, muggings, robberies, that type of thing. So 74% more likely. They are also 24 times as likely to commit rape or sexual assault. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out the link here. I mean, if we really care about, especially, the level of juvenile crime in any of our communities, we had better start caring about what we're doing about DV and child abuse. Because the fact is, criminals in America don't crawl up from our walks fully formed. They're born, bred, and raised in American homes. Children live what they learn. If all I learned as a kid is violence will get me a payoff and not a sanction, that's what I'm going to use to solve my problems. That's what I'm going to use to solve my problems. These kids also kill themselves 6 times the national rate of kids who don't live abuse. That's a tragedy. I mean, if you had to live all the time in a house filled with violence, you'd want to kill yourself too. The last two have to do with shelters. I just want to say one thing. In a country that considers itself one of the leading countries in the nation, you know, it seems unconscionable to me that we have 1,200 shelters for battered women and children and almost 4,000 animal shelters. I'm sorry, that's just a bit skewed to me. I mean, what is it that we care more about? If we want battered women to leave, and sometimes that's our first thought, I ask you, where is she going to go? Where is she going to go? I mean, in San Diego County, 7 out of every 10 women don't get in. There's no room at the inn. So what's the answer? Well, we certainly need more shelters, but as a law enforcement officer, I got to tell you, my tendency is to say, you know, it's a little unfair expecting mom and the kids to leave all the time. Why don't we just incarcerate the batterer until they get the message? Of course, you can't keep them in jail forever. Let's make them go and work a work furlough, or make them go to counseling and change their behavior, so we don't have to keep building shelters to house women and children in. The reason why we have 40% of urban populations that are homeless consist of battered women and children is because there isn't enough room. There's not enough room. So that's the shelter situation. Now, last but not least on the big picture, I can tell you, my audience in San Diego was 88% men. Okay, 88% of our department is male. That means that only 12% of our population is female. And when, in my audience, I'm talking to mainly men, many of whom are 5'10", 6 feet, 6 feet and over, 200 pounds, even if they're 175, they're buffed out because they pump iron, because they want to be strong cops. And when I'm talking to men like this, who've never been knocked on their ass by someone who loves them, it's very sad, I think, that DV does not resonate in the minds of most men, especially law enforcement officers, whom we hire because they can handle themselves. So it's unlikely that I'm going to meet a lot of male officers who've been the victim of physical domestic violence. So for me to try to get them to get inside the head of a battered woman and empathize is like a fart in church. You know, it just doesn't go over. But I have to tell you, I've never met a cop in 20 years of being a cop and 2 years of traveling across the country who doesn't love kids. So what we told our cops is, if you can't dredge up that empathy for battered women, then change your response, follow the protocol, follow the policy, follow the law for the kids. Because I'll tell you what, even from the time that they're 2 months old and infants, they exhibit cellular thrive symptoms. We think they're not effective, they're effective from the time that they're 2 months old. And you look down through those list of behaviors, if any of you have ever worked with juvenile delinquents, do these things look familiar? These things look familiar. They start ripping out cars, they start taking dope, getting into gangs, pulling petty thefts, becoming problem kids. You know? What do we do about what they saw in their homes? Did we do anything? And historically, of course, we didn't do anything. While that's up there, I want to play a tape for you. We went into the schools, actually the advocates went in about 10 years ago, in San Diego to all the school children, junior high, elementary, in some cases kindergarten, and we told the kids, when you see dad hitting mom or mom hitting dad, pick up the phone and call 911. We had 911 throughout the whole system in the county, and 2.5 million people. And we told them, when the kids see that, pick up the phone, we'll come and help. So what happened was, we're at the day now that three-quarters, not three-quarters, 1/3 of all of our calls on 911 and DV come from kids. And we like it for a couple of reasons. First of all, we know that gives the kids a place where they'll be listened to and helped. Number two, it's compelling evidence, and we use it to do our victimless prosecution thing. I want to play this tape, and when I get done, I'm going to ask you what you think was going on in this household. It's called the Lisa tape. By the way, there are 3 kids in the home, a 6-year-old girl named Lisa, who's now 11, a 4-year-old girl by the name of Andrea, a 3-week-old baby boy. Mom's name is Cindy, dad's name is Pierre, and you can guess at what's going on as you listen to the tape.
No, we have none called to CTO.
FBI stats say there are 35 incidents of violence before the victim herself will pick up the phone and call the police. I tell cops when you get there, you know what you're seeing? A little tiny shred of what's really going on, a slice, if you will. And it's your job as an investigator to try to get as much of the picture as you can. How many of you think there was serious violence going on at this call? Can I see your hands? Anybody think it was minimal violence? It was minimal violence. Pushing, shoving, the only mark on Cindy's neck was a red mark where Pierre grabbed her neck. He's trying to get the baby away from her. That's it. Suffices for a felony arrest, even though we'll prosecute as a misdemeanor, we'll knock it down 17B4 2 days later. He went to jail. But if that's how traumatized a child is, when they see pushing and shoving and grabbing her around the neck, in fact, later on the tape she says to the dispatcher, she has red marks on her neck. That's it. Imagine what happens when you introduce blood, guns, knives, and the injury or the violence is much worse. Kids don't deserve to live in this. They're prisoners of war. As police officers, it's our job to make sure that we hold the batter accountable. The other charges, by the way, that we tack on a lot is child endangerment. If mom was holding the kid and she was being assaulted, we tack on child endangerment. And that one always we get a conviction on, even if the first one fails. Because it is putting a child in harm's way. So this is what I call the big picture. 5 different causes of domestic violence, with the most important one being at the top and the least important being at the bottom. The first one being what we call underlying foundation of most of the domestic violence that we encounter as we do our daily work, and that is the reality of the patriarchal cultural value system. Now imagine what I was up against. I'm teaching the brand new recruits in the academy about this, right? Well, who here has ever taught at the academy? Can I see hands? Okay, isn't it neat, you know? I mean, recruits are so amoeba-like. You know, if you outrank them, it's wonderful because you can tell them black is white and they'll salute and say, yes ma'am or yes sir, and they just believe you. It's wonderful. But you walk into a lineup like I did with this particular overhead, and it's motor officers. Combined tenure, 400 years. Covered in leather, head to foot. Look like they come from Hitler's army, right? Feet on the table, requisite body language and crossed arms, and they're looking at me saying, what the hell kind of shit is this Odell? Patriarchal cultural value system? You have got to be kidding. So I told them all, look, I know you're really all from Missouri, the show me state, so I did my homework. I brought proof. And I don't rely on that thumb, you know, stick no bigger than a thumb. It's been beat to death to coin a phrase. I don't like to use it. So I went back and picked out references that I found. Actually, the stack is about this thick. But, you know, transparencies are $4.50 a piece, so I only made 4 of them for you. If you want to do the homework and the research yourself, you're welcome to. There are references that go back to before the birth of Christ that speak to the fact that this is true. We have a patriarchy. We live under a patriarchy. And, I mean, there are references again, and I'm going to share with you 4 of my favorites, and I try to be equal opportunity in terms of ethnic population. We'll start with my favorite, from Confucius, who uttered in 551 to 479 BC these words. 100 women are not worth a single testicle. I don't know. I don't know the guy. I never met the guy. But I would guess that he may be a chauvinist, sexist pig who really believes males are superior, and because of that can do to females who are inferior whatever they want to. Fair guess? 100 women are not worth a single testicle. This is before the birth of Christ. We're talking a long time ago. Okay, Boris and his buddies, old Russian proverb. A wife isn't a jug, she won't crack if you hit her 10 times. Old Russian proverb from their historical books. In France, so now we're on to the French. In the year 584, that's just after Christ was born, in Lyons, France, 43 Catholic bishops and 20 other men representing bishops took a lengthy debate, took a vote. The results were 32 yes, 31 no. Women were declared human by one vote. Women were declared human by one vote. And the last of them, which is why I don't necessarily send DV victims to ministers, rabbis, and priests unless I really know that this person is educated about this issue and will not tell her to keep from being deep to go home and wear a nice dress and cook a nice meal and be nicer to him, and then he won't beat her. This certainly was one of the earliest things from the pulpit advised Middle Ages, 467 to 1453. Men should beat their wives, and we're going to go a little further, folks. Wives should kiss the rod that beats them. So, what am I saying? Well, I'm saying we live in a patriarchy, and that is the underlying foundation of why we wink our eyes, we minimize, we make excuses whenever our assailant is an intimate partner. And what do we have to do to change that? Am I talking about the fact that we should move to a matriarchy? No. But what I am saying is if we really mean what we say in our world, and we say it often enough, that there's too much violence, there's too much crime, and we want it to end, we want it to stop, we want it to disappear. Of course, the cops would be out of a job, right? But wouldn't that be nice? If we didn't have to worry about so much crime. If we want our world to change, we need to move to a different place. A different place in which we rear little boys and little girls in much the same fashion, with not engendering or empowering one gender to feel as if they have an absolute right to exercise power and control and intimidation and violence over someone they consider inferior. That's my advice. So, take it for what it's worth. Obviously, it's a huge societal question that goes far beyond the criminal justice system. Maybe teachers have a role in this, parents have a role in it, society in general has a role in it. By changing our attitude to assault is assault, no matter if it's her husband or a complete stranger, there's really no difference. So, patriarchal cultural value system. We still have a patriarchy when we have judges like we do in the South area of the United States, and needless to say they're not all in the South, where in one instance a guy came home, found his wife in bed with another man and killed her. And the judge, as he slapped him on the wrist and gave him probation, said, "I know how you would feel." Well, I'm going to tell you, I didn't know that death was a penalty for adultery. If it truly were, a few of the cops I work with at San Diego PD would be dead now. Because there's a lot of people in the world that commit adultery. You don't deserve to die for adultery. You just don't. And as long as we have people in black robes, or people as prosecutors or law enforcement that kind of minimize what happens to people because who did it was an intimate partner, we can continue to say we live in patriarchy because we're not looking at it the way it should be looked at. The second cause of domestic violence, immediate community of peers. The best way to explain this is to give you a scenario. Let's say there's a guy named John, and John is a batterer. And John gets pissed at his wife, so he slaps her, and he goes to the local bar to drown his sorrows. And John is sitting there at the bar drinking his big 16-ounce beer, and maybe he's fat-mouthing to some of his friends. Do you think this is possible? Maybe he's saying some stuff like, "Yeah, that bitch, man, she tried to push me around, but no woman's going to tell me what to do." Do you think this is possible? As he's drinking his beer, he's doing this? Yeah. How many of you think John's peers are going to take him aside and say, "John, buddy, we think you have a problem with inappropriate use of violence in an intimate relationship, and you should get some therapy"? Probably not, huh? Let me ask you one question. What do we say when we say nothing? We say it's okay. If it were really bad, if he said he sodomized his 5-year-old daughter, wouldn't we say something? When we say nothing, we condone what we hear. Bad things happen when good people do nothing. So, what's the answer? Well, I'll tell you, Ann Odell, Sarah Buell, all of us who care about this issue can go around the entire world speaking out against domestic violence. And you know when it will start to end? When men in this country, in this world, begin to hold other men accountable for their violence. That's when it's going to stop. That's when it's going to stop. And law enforcement officers in this room have a unique opportunity. And it has everything to do with your role when you get there. What do? You investigate crime. You enforce the law, right? That's your job. That's why we're peace officers. So when you get there and you do the investigation, you discover probable cause, and now you have to make an arrest. You've got a couple choices as to how you make it. You can do it the way we did it maybe 6, 7 years ago when we were just starting our change process in San Diego. And you can say stuff like, oh man, I don't want to do this, but my hands are tied, department policy, state law, and I really don't want to take you to jail, but that's one way of doing it. And when you do it that way, guess what happens? You further empower him. The next time he has an opportunity, she's going to get it worse because after all, you said you really didn't want to do it. Or you can do what we finally evolved to in San Diego. No excuses, Jack. We have this thing called zero tolerance for domestic violence in San Diego. You do not beat your partner in San Diego and get away with it. Count on it. We don't buy excuses. We don't make apologies. It's turn around, hands behind your back, they go to jail. That's when it's going to make a difference. When men hold other men accountable for the use of violence. In your packet, please don't look now because it's further down in the material, but in your packet you have a handout from Real Men in Brookline, Massachusetts. It says 10 things that men can do to end male violence and sexism against women. And I didn't make it up, Real Men did. They are one of several organizations in this country and in Canada that are comprised totally of men who work against male violence against women. And there are 10 suggestions on it. I just ask you to look at them, especially if any of you men in the room have little boys. Please think about these things as you bring a little boy up, because you either bring him up to feel like he can do this, or he has no business, if he calls himself a real man, in doing this. So it's good information. I hope you use it. The third cause of domestic violence is family of origin. You'll notice I didn't say culture. And it's really funny. Once in a while I have people come up and say, well, you know, those Latin American cultures, you know, they're so hot-blooded. Don't they have more of this? No, not really. They really don't. All cultures have domestic violence. All of them deal with it in the same way. They kind of wink at it, minimize it. They don't take it seriously. Everybody's starting to change now. But there are differences that I see in how the batterers manifest themselves. So it doesn't happen in one culture over another. But this is what happens in San Diego. Understand we're right next to Mexico, okay? So 30% of our clientele is Hispanic. Many times we'll arrest a batterer who's only been in the States for a month. He's come from the interior of Mexico. When we arrest him for breaking his wife's nose, he will say to the detective, very overtly, of course I punched her. She is my wife. She is my property in Spanish. Now, if we arrest a white guy, totally Caucasian, from America, for breaking his wife's nose, the only difference between him and the Hispanic guy is he knows it's politically incorrect to say that. He did the same thing. No difference in level of injury. He just doesn't say it quite the same way. Those are the cultural differences we see as we interact with people. But in terms of one culture having more of it than others, not a chance. Not a chance. Sometimes we'll get called to a specific area more often than not, and many times what it will turn out to be is more highly populated areas of our city, where many times minorities live because it's the cheapest part of the city to live in. Interesting thing, we did a study in San Diego to figure out who called the police on DV. 65% of our callers on domestic violence calls didn't even live in the home. They were neighbors, which then told us the reason why we got a high number of calls from this particular area in San Diego was highly populated. Lots of people live in apartments close to one another. So the neighbors hear it and they call it. Okay, the big difference between a batterer who may be poor and a minority member who's beating his partner, between him and our more affluent batterers is the affluent ones live in Rancho Santa Fe, 5-acre minimum, lot, right? Nicely constructed house. Who hears them beat their wife? So there sometimes is a disproportionate amount of reports that come in from a poor minority area than a more, affluential area of town. But I got to tell you, the people who do research in domestic violence know, and I do too, that this happens in all cultures. There just simply isn't one culture that's more apt to do it. The fourth cause of domestic violence, inner psychological makeup and symbolic role of the batterer. I have a good friend from South Dakota. I just, earlier this week on Monday and Tuesday spent 2 days teaching reservation police in 2 different reservations, Pine Ridge and Rosebud, about how to better enforce domestic violence laws. And Marlon Rousseau is associated with Pine Ridge Reservation. He's in charge of all the men's groups. And he and I happened to be in the Yukon Territory about 2 years ago, training people, cops, Mounties, and stuff like that about DV. And I was struggling through this, and Marlon took me aside at the break, and he said, you know what this inner psychological makeup and symbolic world of the batter is? He knows, because he mainly counsels batters. I said, what is it? He says, the common euphemism for it, shit talk. Shit talk in the mind of a batterer in which he totally denies any personal involvement or responsibility for what he did. This is how it works. First of all, you gotta know that in a relationship, the batterer makes the rules. Now, sometimes they're nice enough to write them down on paper. We had a dentist batterer in San Diego that wrote down 22 rules for his wife to follow, okay? Specific rules, like hang the towels this way, every Wednesday is steak night. If you ever get upset with me and you cry and have tears in your eyes, go in the other room so I won't see the tears in your eyes. And when we're out in public and dancing, gaze at me lovingly while we're dancing. That kind of specific rules. We hung his ass in court. It was wonderful evidence. But even when they don't write down the rules, they know what the rules are, and so does the victim. What do they say? Well, let's see. Don't get a job. I don't want you to work outside the home. Don't cut your hair. I like long hair. Don't ever wear red. It looks trampy. Don't hang around with her. She's a tramp. Don't hang around your family so much they take advantage of you. Every Thursday, I want steak on the table, and I want my dinner ready at 6 p.m. when I come through the door. Clean the house exactly so, etc., etc., etc. You can never talk to other men at a party. So she knows what the rules are. So when she breaks the rules, knowing full well that it's going to piss him off, what happens? He feels like the victim, and she's the perpetrator, because she crossed him. So we show up as the cops, and we wonder why they're in such complete denial, these guys, because they don't think they did anything wrong. Because in their mind, they've turned it all around. I mean, think about O.J. Simpson's suicide note. At times, I felt like about her husband. Gee, seems to me Nicole was stabbed to death, not him. You know, but at times, he felt like a battered husband. So, inner psychological makeup and symbolic world. That's why anger management and stress management doesn't work in DV. Because what you have to change is the inner psychological makeup and symbolic world, and the fact that these batteries think they have a complete, absolutely complete right to put the rules in place and have her follow them. Now, the last cause of domestic violence, the least important, environmental stressors.
Those things that we were talking about, use of alcohol, use of drugs, stress, anger, frustration, losing somebody's job, not enough money, too many kids, those are what we call environmental stressors, and they don't operate unless this stuff is in place, okay? They don't operate unless this stuff is in place. Now, the thing that makes environmental stressors really interesting is, let me ask the audience, especially the cops, do all of you make enough money? Do you make enough money in your job? You do? Jesus, where do you work? Oh, you said no, absolutely not. Okay. So you ever get stressed over not enough money? You know, I feel like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You ever get angry at your boss? If your boss is here, just kind of nod, okay? You ever get angry at your boss? Sure. You ever get frustrated? You ever have too much to drink? You know, if it's under the statute of limitations, you don't have to answer. I can tell you after graveyard, I used to drink red beer. I learned how to drink it, you know? I hated beer. It was cheap, though. Put tomato juice in it. After you work all night long, that's how you go to sleep, as a young cop. Later on, I learned that was really stupid. But in the early days, I would drink too much. Now, the difference between people who use violence and people who don't is they make a choice. Batterers make a choice to respond to environmental stressors by becoming violent. They make a choice. Don't we all deal with environmental stressors? We all get angry, we get stressed, we get frustrated. Sometimes we run out of money. Sometimes we have too many kids. Sometimes we get a little jealous, even though it's really stupid because all that means is you think you own the person, not that you just love them. But we do get jealous. What really matters is what we do about our jealous feelings, how we operate on them. So the difference between nonviolent people and batterers is when environmental stressors happen to them, their response is to handle it with violence. It's the only difference. You know, alcohol, I hear all the time, alcohol causes DV. It doesn't cause DV. What it does is give a batterer who won't do it sober a cop-out reason, rationale for doing what he did, and he can say, I don't remember a thing. You know that guy that's just a peach, and then he drinks 2 six-packs of Bud, and now he's a monster. Okay, that's the only difference between him and sober batterers. So, that's the first myth. The second myth is the myth of provocation. This was a really tough one to tackle in San Diego, but we finally made some headway. Why was it so tough? Because we had years and years and years and years and years of police administrators and people who knew what was going on telling us, these people are crazy, they're lunatics, they beat each other up. So I went into this thinking most of these people beat each other up. An amazing thing happened. The more I learned about domestic violence, and as the thousands of cases came drifting into the unit, it became apparent that for many of our batterers that we arrested, they only beat up one person, or possibly two. They only beat up their partner and or the children. That I never typically found, with rare exception, case reports or part of their rap that said that they beat up their bosses. Let me ask, why don't you think a batterer would beat up his boss? There's a real easy answer. Why wouldn't a batterer beat the snot out of his boss when he gets angry? He'd pay a price, he'd lose his job. So instead of being a payoff, there's something called a sanction. What do we want to do when we change the behavior of people? We give them a sanction for their activities and behavior, not a payoff. So if a batterer chose to just punch his boss out who pisses him off, like he tells us he punched his wife out because she provoked him, then, then we'd know, well, he's really stupid. And some of them are. Some of them have really long criminal histories, but many of them only have that DV thing. Some of them do everything else. They get arrested for drunk driving, they're into drugs, burglaries, and other assaultive behavior. But the vast majority of batterers we deal with only have this DV stuff typically, and sometimes DV and DUI together. So it finally became clear to us that unlike what we always believed, the batterers can't help themselves, that they're provoked beyond normal limits, that it's a temper thing, that they get so angry they can't do anything else. That is not true. We now know that batterers instead make a conscious, rational decision about who's going to be battered, where it will happen, how long it will go on, and how intense it will be. They're kind of a wimpy criminal as I see it. They got to be in a quiet, private place, and then they let her have it. So it isn't a matter of provocation. It's the same kind of flawed thinking that says we're going to look at a rapist and say he couldn't help himself because she had a short, tight skirt on, so he had to rape her. I mean, give me a break. Do we really think that men don't have minds, that they can't make decisions? It's that same kind of flawed thinking. So we have thrown out provocation. We don't buy it as an excuse anymore. And this is our current philosophy in San Diego. When we go to the house, if he tells us that every Friday night she's in the bar talking with other men, and that's what makes him so mad, or if he tells us that she's running around and having 2 affairs on him, or if she's a lousy housekeeper, a lousy mother, a lousy lover, that she didn't cook a nice hot meal for him when he came home, that she's 150 pounds overweight and that pisses him off, or that she got a job and she wasn't supposed to get a job, or if she swears a blue streak in front of the cops while we're there, it doesn't matter. You know why? Because there's no law in this country against being a bitch. But there is a law against being a batterer. So if his response to any of these environmental stressors I just described is to spit on her, choke her, kick her, punch her, if that's his response, we have a present for him in San Diego. Matching silver bracelets, and he goes directly to jail. Lay him on, Jack. Doesn't make any difference at all. We know you made a choice. We don't buy provocation anymore. So, last one. Who are these people? Well, cops like to think that, and I include myself in that if he looks like a scumbag asshole, that's our term for a jerk, a scumbag asshole, then he must be a batterer, right? Easier to believe if he looks bad. The problem with this theory is that not all batterers look like that. In fact, people will say to me, what does a batterer look like? And this is what I say, they look like everybody. Wouldn't it be great if they had that neon blinking B right in the middle of their forehead? If you were going to date them, you could say, I'm not dating you, you're going to hit me. Or if you get to the call, cop could say, he's a batterer, hook him up. It doesn't work that way. Other than that, they look like everybody in our community. And in fact, sometimes our batterer works in the local prosecutor's office. Sometimes they work next to us at a PD. Sometimes they give us our bank loan at the bank. Sometimes they sell us our brand new car. They teach our children. They're principals of our school. They work in our local supermarket. Sometimes they're members of our own family. Sometimes they wear a black robe. Doesn't mean they're not a batterer. And sometimes they're day laborers. Maybe they pick lettuce. The point is, batterers come from all walks of life. And in order to ensure in San Diego that our cops use the same standard for everybody, that is, They treat Joe Shit the Rag Man the same as they do as the president of Roar Corporation. We provided for them our notable lineup of batterers in the early days. We still use it. There's 7 neon poster boards, and on those we put press clippings of notable batteries in our country, and I just want to share some of them with you. One of them was a local judge. In fact, the story of his particular crime is in the second article you've got in your materials called Stopping the Violence, the Role of the Police Officer and the Prosecutor. Judge Joseph W. Davis battered his 5.5-month pregnant girlfriend. Didn't look like a batterer, looked like a judge, sitting there reading law books when we got there, but he battered her, pregnant girlfriend. We had a doctor in San Diego, we had a lawyer from New York, Joel Steinberg, Jewish, middle to upper class, highly educated, beat his wife, had an Nussbaum for years, and killed their 6-year-old adopted daughter, Lisa. We had a politician from Washington, John Fetters, beat his wife, Charlotte Fetters, for 17 years and all their children until she blew the whistle on him. He was the second person in charge of the Securities Exchange Commission, no longer there, of course, because his little problem was revealed to the public. We had our sports representative back in 1990, O.J. Simpson, 89 conviction for beating Nicole Brown Simpson. Today, of course, we'd have a plethora of them, lots of them, you know, Darryl Strawberry, Warren Moon, they're all around. We had a San Diego police officer, Pablo Agrio, nice guy, worked the DARE program on the department, 8.5 years, very well liked. Everybody said good stuff about Pablo. In 1987, on 2 occasions, he battered his wife. Minimal injury. We didn't follow our own policy. Our policy was you make an arrest when you see an injury. We didn't do that. We wrote a report. We thought that we were covering our butts that way. Nobody messed with Pablo's career. Nobody wanted to mess with it. He was such a nice guy. No one really believed that, you know, he did this on purpose. We never sent him to counseling. We never reprimanded him. We just kind of glossed it over those 2 times. And then in 1988, the night she graduated from the Sheriff's Academy, he shot and killed his wife. And we found out very dramatically that some batterers wear uniforms. And in my estimation, because this is one of the particular areas of study I have, they make the best batterers and stalkers on the face of the earth, because they know the system. So, we all of a sudden had to put a policy in place for those among us who would break the law and make sure that we applied the same standard. So the bottom line is they come from everywhere.